is 9:02 a.m., January 25th, 2012, and this meeting of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority Board is now in session. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish everyone a Happy New Year. I'm excited to see so many of our local engineering friends in the audience today, and I appreciate your participation. I'm very excited about the future of mobility in this community going forward, and I appreciate the efforts of the staff. I'm very grateful for the efforts of the board, and so we're looking forward to great things in 2012 and beyond. With that, Linda, is there any public comments?
We do. We have two people signed up to speak, Mr. Richard Dayub and Mr. Joe Cardenas.
Great. Richard, before we speak, I'd like to skip to item 10 real fast because I believe that some of the topics that we're going to cover are going to relate specifically to item 10. So if we could jump on the agenda today to item 10, which is specifically discussion and action on the general engineering consultant's use of local resources on CRRMA projects, I believe that may shed some light and add some discussion for the speakers. Mr. Tejas?
Thank you. Raymond Tejas, Executive Director of the Camino Real RMA. Item number 10 relates to the use of the general engineering consultants team. The RMA recently received some comments from local engineering firms that related to how we selected the design team for the westbound to northbound direct connector for the Americas interchange. There was some discussion related to the procurement process and why the RMA didn't go out for selection of a firm for that project. And the response ultimately was the timelines attached to the Proposition $12 that were included for the westbound and northbound direct connector simply didn't permit for it. But it caused the chair and myself to sit down and think about the procurement process that we utilize and to make sure that the general engineering consultant firm, the team that we use, is maximizing the use of local resources. So that's what this item is really about, and I believe we have some interested members of the local engineering community that want to speak on this. But with that in mind, the chair and I and the vice chair have kicked around several options in terms of how to make sure that the local resources are utilized for the benefit of the RMA projects. And really, I think what my recommendation to this board is going to be is really a twofold recommendation, which really falls to two steps. I think that, and I should give a little bit of additional background. The staff looked at, with our consultants, our attorneys and other consultants, we looked at all of the options available to us. We looked at potentially doing a pre-qualification process, which is similar to the city of El Paso's, where the RMA would essentially have a list of engineering firms that have been pre-qualified from which the RMA could then select an engineering firm relatively quickly. We also, one of the issues that arose with that, though, is when you do something like that, you're usually selecting by discipline. And in a situation like the RMA, which has a staff member of essentially one, you don't have the ability to manage individual contracts by discipline for each project. So then we looked at potentially putting out a procurement for teams. So instead of a discipline, for example, design, you would actually have a team that could come in and handle all of the work on a project, including design, geotech, and the like. The problem with that approach is that we've already done that. In 2009, we selected the general engineering consultant for that very reason. And as you know, the general engineering consultant serves as essentially the engineering department for the RMA. So it seemed to be counter to the intent of the way that this board decided to pursue the general engineering consultant contract. So with all of that in mind, then, my recommendation to this board in terms of proceeding and making sure that local resources are utilized, what I'm going to recommend is, again, a two-step approach. First is that I would request that the board direct the general engineering consultant to develop some sort of an outreach plan whereby they are apprised of all of the local resources that are out there in the region and identify each of the firms and speak with each of them that are interested, of course, to see if there aren't potential opportunities down the road where the GEC team could be supplemented by additional local resources. Now, I mentioned that because I think really, honestly, that is the cleaner and quicker approach to resolve the underlying issue, which is bringing additional local resources onto the GEC team. We have that ability already. The General Engineering Consultant Agreement allows for the GEC to bring on additional consultants upon the approval of the RMA. So we have that ability, and that would be my first recommendation. The second recommendation would be for the board to direct the GEC to provide, I would suggest, biannual reports every 6 months to come back to this board and tell us of the resources, of the fees that they've earned as a general engineering consultant, what percentage of that and what number is that have gone to the local resources. So it's a twofold approach that I think goes to addressing the concerns that have been raised. So with that, I would turn it over to the chair.
And just as a matter of background, because we have some board members that were not on the board at the time that we went out for the RFQ for the GEC, we went out subsequent to the Professional Services Procurement Act and in accordance with our RMA procurement procedures, and we received 3 responses, URS, HNTB, and PBS&J, now known as Atkins. So they were the 3 primes, and each of those primes had a number of local firms that had joined that effort for the GEC. In our case, with Atkins, who was selected, it was Bracken Bustillos, it was ECM, it was Licon, and also Suzanne Michaels, who was in charge of communication at the time. So every GEC that proposed had a number of local firms that were part of their total RFQ. The board, in accordance with our procurement and in addition with the help of both TxDOT and the city, went through and selected Atkins or PBS&J for a 5-year term from 2009 through 2014. Also on this new westbound to northbound connector that Atkins is currently working on, there's a total of 6 firms, of which 3 are local, that are working on that particular connector. So I wanted to put some of that in background so we can understand that. But with that said, as the RMA gets busier, as there's additional projects coming to the table, we believe that there's additional capacity that we have to go out, and as some of the firms begin to get busier, we can engage local firms based on their expertise, based on their ability, and do more to push more of that work to the local engineering community, and then use this 6-month follow-up with the GEC to make sure that that's actually happening. So with that said, and with that background, at this point, we'd like to begin with the public comments.
First, we have Mr. Richard Dayu.
Good morning. For the record, Richard Dayu, President and CEO of the Greater El Paso Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, for this opportunity to speak to you. And more importantly, thank you for taking the time to meet with us over the last few weeks with our chairman, Jack Chapman, and our staff to talk about these concerns. I want to put Mr. Jacobs' mind at ease. He joked with me this morning that he thinks he's about to get run over by a bus. And one of our partners here commented that it wasn't a fully loaded bus. So our approach, as I think you've seen from our meeting with you and hearing your remarks, are very encouraging to us, is we come before you really hand in hand, non-confrontational, really to simply underscore what you just said, a few other comments regarding what we think might be good steps towards a better working relationship with the local GEC that's in charge, as well as the engineering community. And I thank you for this opportunity to address you this morning. Each of you have a copy of a letter that we have sent to the chairman to speak on this issue, and I think that captures most of what the concerns have been. And it doesn't just necessarily apply to the contracting portion as it relates to engineering. There are some other opportunities we've seen come about that have been challenging from time to time, and all we want to do is encourage the use of companies who are not necessarily headquartered here, but have a strong local presence and therefore support the local economy. That's really the driving force behind my comments. So without further ado, I won't duplicate commentary. Raymond has already, I think, captured some of the key points. So I'll just say that for the record, we support the recommendations that the executive director has made to you with regard to these efforts to work better. The local engineering firms, the ACEC local chapter, my understanding from our conversations, are more than willing to assist the RMA in developing selection criteria. One of the suggestions was to use the city's listings already so that you can expedite a process when necessary, which we certainly do support. Excuse me. We also recommend that the RMA consider adding some local preference language to their procurement policies. And again, this goes back to my earlier comment. A company who's headquartered out of town may be considered local if they actually contribute to the economy. And I understand this is a difficult area because where's the break point? How many employees should you have in the marketplace? The city just recently went through a rather lengthy and somewhat challenging discussion over that same issue. I think as it pertains to engineering, the comments I've heard are if you have 10 employees or more in the marketplace, irrespective of where you're headquartered, you probably have a commitment to this community to work on jobs here and provide services at the local level versus pipelining it to an out-of-town location. Again, that's sort of an arbitrary number, but I think it's at least a good starting point for discussion. Excuse me. Moving forward, we recommend that the RMA work with the local ACC chapter in order to help facilitate a working relationship between the engineering firms and the RMA, and I think you've already captured that in your remarks, Mr. Chairman. The Chamber is committed to assisting the RMA Executive Director, Mr. Tejas, in coordinating a meeting between the GEC and the local engineering firms. We talked about trying to simply provide the GEC with more knowledge and information about what's available in terms of expertise in the various disciplines in the marketplace, and to have that GEC then understand what is available to them as they go forward on additional projects. Finally, the Executive Director and the Chamber have agreed to work together to disseminate all contract opportunities through our membership. So as additional opportunities become available, whether that's related to the engineering community or some other contracts that you're awarding, that we will make sure we disseminate that through our 1,800 members so that there is no excuse from individual entities or organizations or individuals to say, I didn't know about the opportunity. I think the marketing contract was a prime example of that challenge. How far do you have to reach out before you expect them to reach back and also participate? So we'll do our part to assist you with that as well. And then we also have committed to the Executive Director that we will work with the GEC to coordinate a meeting at the Chamber with all of the engineering firms who wish to participate, to have a dialogue, a candid and friendly dialogue over how to best to proceed and what's expected from both entities in order to result with saving money, providing local business opportunities, and working better together to get these projects completed. Those are all my comments, and unless you have questions of me, I want to thank you again for this opportunity to speak before you.
Any questions from the board? And Richard, I very much appreciate that your continued diligence to make sure that the local firms are represented, that they're all getting equal opportunities. And I can tell you that as a board and as myself as the chair with a locally based business, I understand that completely, and we are fully engaged in that process, that as additional work becomes available to engage more local firms. So we very much appreciate that. I'm not certain, after a number of discussions and a lot of thought about how best to go through and procure those services. It's our belief, myself as the chair, our vice chair, as we look at that, we believe we can best use our GEC to go out and engage those local engineering services or other professional services that may be out there. As you know, we're a very limited staff. My background is in transportation. Raymond's background, he has a legal background. So we need someone from an engineering perspective to help us to manage that. And that's exactly, as Raymond mentioned, the GEC is our engineering department. So they've got to be involved in the process is our fundamental belief. And we believe that we can very actively go out, engage the local community, get them more involved, And we believe we can demonstrate that to the local community by having the GEC report to us on a twice-a-year basis just how effective we are. And if we are effective, then those are the results. If we are not effective, then we can use those results to tweak what we're doing and look to see how that can be improved. But we believe that we really want to utilize the GEC, create some sort of vendor fair or something that we can go out and engage the local engineering community, understand what their strengths are, where their capacity is, how we can work together, and how we can do more work as a community.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you have the Chamber's commitment to assist you in any way we can. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker, Mr. Joe Cardenas.
Mr. Chairman, good morning, members. Raymond, good morning. First of all, I applaud your efforts in what I heard Mr. Tejas say about being proactive now and engaging the opportunities that might be available for the local firms. I am president of Moreno Cárdenas, an engineering company that's based in El Paso. We've been here for 22 years. And I think what I'm about to share with you represents not only my thoughts and my experience as a consultant for over 30 years in El Paso, but with the firm that Robert and I started 22 years ago, but also with my colleagues that are here today. I think what we're here for today is to say is we want the opportunity to compete for engineering services that this RMA may put out. Mr. McLaughlin, you said there's going to be opportunities in the future. We look forward to those opportunities. I think that's great for not only the transportation infrastructure of the city, but for economic development and certainly for the prosperity of local engineering firms. A little bit of history. Engineering firms started in El Paso roughly in the 50s. Firms like Bettis Engineering, Nick Bettis, some of you probably remember him. His son became a state representative from this area. Conde Engineering, Tony Conde, one of the pioneers in consulting engineering. Hector Holguin, Mr. Holguin, your father, started as a consulting engineer. Parkhill Smith & Cooper, a firm out of Lubbock, has been here since 1958. Our firm, and there's numerous others that are here, and the expertise in transportation infrastructure, I'm talking about planning and design, resides with local firms. There's a lot of us, and we take a lot of pride in our work. Some of us have worked on major projects. Our firm, Moreno Cárdenas, Parkhill Smith & Cooper, Robert Kistner, we worked on Spur 601. Parkhill Smith & Cooper and our firm, we were major design partners on that Abrams team. So we did a considerable amount of infrastructure design and planning work. We are all committed to the community. Mr. Holguin, Tony Conrad Conde, Bob Navarro. That's another firm that's been here for many years. That firm started as Peinado Engineering, Arnold and Bob. Those four gentlemen have been active as chairman of the Chamber of Commerce over the past 25, 30 years. All of these gentlemen here are involved in the community. We live here. We want this to be a very successful community, and we want to be part of that opportunity to procure for you to procure services from our firms. A couple of things I want to point out. I looked at the annual report for 2010 that's on the website, your website. Goal 5 is to support economic development and local business of the region. I think we certainly fall in that category. Again, I applaud Mr. Tejas, and we look forward to that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Is your brother Tom Cardenas?
Yes, he is.
Okay, and just for the record, Tom Cardenas with ECM is part of our GEC community. And I don't want to give the impression that our GEC and that the RMA is not friendly to local business, because we absolutely, positively are. I mean, we are all local business people, men and women that live in this community, work in this community, and understand your concern. It's a bit of a delicate process because we had several teams set up, as I mentioned, through the original RFP for the GEC. Some of the engineering firms were with one of the other primes that was not selected, and so now we're looking together as a group how we can figure out how we can move some of that work and as we get busier and to assist the entire engineering community.
Oh, for the record, and I'm not denying Tom's my brother. But for the record, ECM does not do design work. And I think the majority of firms here are here because of the interest in planning and design. So
All right, I just wanted to clarify that, we do have a number of local firms. We are committed. I very much appreciate your comments, and I very much appreciate you giving the board your perspective, which is a very valuable perspective. Thank you very much.
Those are all the public comments we had.
So at this point, I believe we're looking at one motion or two motions, Mr. Tejas?
I'd recommend one motion with two.
So the motion basically is, in a nutshell, that we are going to engage the GEC to actively engage the local engineering or professional services community, I believe is how it's read in the motion, to understand their capabilities and then report to us on a twice-a-year basis with how effective they are in utilizing and spending those dollars on a local level. Is that correct, Mr. Tejas?
That's my recommendation, yes, sir.
So move.
That's all right.
Second.
Well, real quick, let's address Dr. Pion's question.
Yeah, I just want to understand what is it discussion time after you made the motion and you seconded it?
We'll back up.
No, I mean, there's obviously a little bit of discussion.
Topic, it needs to be fully understood.
Yeah, because I just want to understand how these two recommendations, which is to direct the GEC to do an inventory of local firms and these biennial reports, how would that take us to the next step of favoring, I guess, or giving some sort of preference to local? The RFQs or the RFPs, I mean, those kinds of things still have to be issued, and we have to evaluate them based on the system that we have to choose those services, and they may or may not qualify. So where's the mechanism? Because somebody mentioned, I think, that short of a local preference language explicit in our statutes, we still have to subject them to this vetting process. So I'm not sure how these steps will actually contribute to an actual local selection.
Well,
Right.
I think I can answer that. There's a number of local firms that are qualified to work on these projects. That, I believe, goes without question. And what we're going to do is provide the metrics in terms of how effective we are in utilizing some firms. We have members of our team today that, as additional projects come on board, such as surveying or geotech or other parts that we may need to go outside of the GEC to procure those services. Our GEC is going to basically tell us who has the capabilities and who can complete the job, and they will manage that to make sure that that's done, as opposed to myself or Raymond trying to select those firms and trying to figure out which firm we're using on which project and how we manage those firms. That's why I'm very adamant and that the GEC is involved in this process to manage the overall construction management of any particular project.
Okay, so let me look.
So in a nutshell, the GEC is going to determine who's qualified and who has the capabilities to work on certain projects.
Okay, that's right. That's part of the inventory.
Can I add something
Sure.
real quick? Because I think really you're talking about two separate processes. The first is as the chair kind of enumerated, that's for when the GEC is doing the design work or is handling a project. Then we have a way to ensure that the GEC is looking to all of the local resources to make sure that the team on that project is heavily local. The other step, which you also referred to, is when we actually go out for a procurement.
Right.
And if you remember at last month's, or I guess the last meeting, I think it was in November, in that meeting, we previously have already committed to review our procurement processes, and specifically when we have a procurement that is ready, whether it's an RFP, RFQ, or otherwise, when that's ready to go out on the street, that's going to go through one of the committees to ensure that we've done everything that we can to bring in the local forces as well. So we're talking about two separate things, and I think the ultimate answer to your question is the procurement process. That we've already committed to review that and tweak that as well. And if you recall, the only parameters there is the lawyers have to agree that we've not stepped outside of the legal parameters.
Right. I just want to, I mean, I am with you. For the record, I think that we should promote local businesses. I mean, in principle, I'm okay with that, and I support the public comments that were made, and I support the efforts of the chairman and your efforts to do that. I just want to make sure that we do not incur into the opposite complaint, that we are actually favoring locals in the process, or because we, just as we have the complaints of the locals that somehow the process has been exclusionary of their participation, then we may have the outside firm saying, well, now you're favoring the locals, and that it passes the legal check. And I'm not sure, and I don't have the answer. I just want to make sure that
I can tell you the way that we fix that is just like we currently do today. We are committed to complete transparency in everything that we do. So everything that we do is available. It's discussed in the board. It's available online, and the public can judge for themselves. We are committed in this process to move forward. One of my dichos is you can't measure, you can't manage what you're not measuring. We're going to put forward in a very clear detail how effectively we're spending dollars locally in the community. And then from there, we can take a look at our policies and make sure that we're being effective in our goal to support the local engineering community.
One question, Raymond. Have you checked into how other regional mobility authorities have dealt with this? Have there been any particular issues with local versus non-local selection processes, or even other government agencies and decisions and policies that have actually worked?
I've not done that on the RMA side, but I can do that. In fact, I will do that. I've spoken with a couple of governmental agencies, in particular the city, to see how they dealt with it, because this is a recurring issue for them as well. So all of that informs this recommendation that I'm making to you today.
But it's a preliminary recommendation, I assume, which is essentially an inventory and a report, so that then we can create policy out of that. Because that's not policy in and of itself. That is sort of allowing some time and some study and inventory and reports, so that then we can move on to make a decision on.
That's true to a certain extent, but the motion would be a formal action of the board, which is in essence the policy direction for the staff to make sure that the GEC is providing locals, the local resources, a percentage that this board finds equitable. If when you receive the first report, the second report, and so on, if you then feel that number is too low, then I think an additional policy step would be appropriate.
Now, in our favor, I think we have tried to advertise and market what we've done, and it's been out there. It's just that I think the RMA, and I think David and I have served from the very beginning, 2007, and Dave and Ralph was also here. From that time, we've been sort of outside the radar of the community overall, kind of flying low, moving along. But as the number of projects and the scope of the projects grow, we're going to draw more attention. And so this is, I think, an instance of how we're growing and drawing more attention to these kinds of things. And so it's good that it's coming up early enough that we can create policy and do those kinds of things. But it's an opportunity. I mean,
it's also a partnership with us and the chamber. We recently just had one response on an RFP or RFQ, one response. So Richard and the chamber has basically committed to make sure that the word is getting out, that they are encouraging their members, and we are submitting those through the chamber to make sure that we're getting participation.
Okay.
Ms. Cardenas?
If I can add something to this discussion. A couple of points, Dr. Payan. You can word a RFP or RFQ to not allow a group to participate. As an example, if an RFQ was issued by this RMA that said firms submitting must have 5 years prior experience working with an RMA, because there's nobody in El Paso that has that experience. Some cities in Texas say 10, 15% of the work in the RFP will go to local firms. So you can either exclude firms or you can include firms by the way you structure that RFP.
And that discussion is what we committed to route through the committees at the last meeting. That's what we committed to do.
Since the organization has never measured this local component, it seems like there's a disconnect. Obviously, there's a disconnect. There's a perception problem. And when will the 6-month report be
Well, I
ready?
think the first one, our next meeting is February 8th. I'm not sure that we can tally all the fees that have been expended through 2009 to today's date by then. So I'd say at the latest, it would be the March board meeting would be our first one, and then 6 months out from there and 6 months there.
Or maybe what we've done since the beginning would be good, just to see.
Right. Oh, absolutely. That's what I expect, is that the first report will include everything from day one through that date, and then thereafter it'll be the 6-month increments.
Okay.
Is there any other questions? If not, was there a motion? Yes. Is there a second?
Mr. Marcus was the motion, and we'll need a second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those not in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you to the local engineering community for your input today, and we appreciate very much your service to this community. Adoption of the minutes for the CRRMA board meeting of November 9th, 2011. Has everyone had an opportunity to review those minutes? There is a move to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those not in favor? The minutes are approved. Item 4, consider and take appropriate action with respect to the defeasance of approximately $28 million of Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority pass-through toll transportation revenue bonds, State Spur 601, Series 2008. Mr. Tejas?
As you may recall, some time ago, back in early of 2011, we looked at the possibility of refunding the bonds for the State Spur 601 Inner Loop project. In the end, the board determined that it didn't make a lot of sense, and in fact directed staff to monitor the markets to determine if the original refunding proposal becomes a viable option in the future, and also to pursue a defeasance scenario. So with that was a board motion from April 13th of 2011. With that, I'll ask Mr. Paul Braden as our bond counsel to come forward and speak to this item. This item is in furtherance of that defeasance scenario direction.
Good morning. Paul Braden with Fulbright and Jaworski, bond counsel to the RMA. As Raymond mentioned, this is actually to call some outstanding bonds on the Spur 601 project. That deal was originally designed to allow for this mechanism. The expectation and part of the negotiations with the developer was that that developer held back, or was a portion of their fee was deferred. It was deferred until after all the bonds are paid off. So there was an expectation that there was going to be some money left after construction and after payment of the upfront fee took place. And then also I think the developer completed the project in a sooner rather than later in terms of the time frame, so that allowed TxDOT's money to start coming in earlier. So that freed up some money, and there's a mechanism where the first bonds that could be called would be in February 15th, and you can start calling bonds. And what you're doing then is you're paying off debt service on the back end of that project, which will free up more money at the end of the project to pay it off. The resolution which is presented before you does that, and it also authorizes the trustee to call the bonds. The amount actually being called is $28,400,000. Actually, Corky Hall with First Southwest Company, who's your financial advisor, just updated that number. The trustee had provided another number, but wasn't taking into account all the interest that has to be paid through the call date. These bonds would be called on March 5th, and basically the trustee would get an instruction letter saying call these bonds, pay off these bondholders, and it's going to be taken from the last 2 maturities right now of your outstanding bonds.
Any questions from the board? There's really nothing else we can do with this money. We've looked at a couple of options. This money has to be used specifically for this project, and the best use of this money, which I believe you're recommending, is the defeasance of this $28,400,000 of bonds with a call date of February 15th, I believe.
Well, call date of March 5th. Just we have to give the trustee 40 days notice, and so with the meeting, we really ran to March 5th. The first callable on February 15th. But I agree, this money has to be used to pay down the bonds. It could sit in the trustee's account, but it doesn't make any sense to ensure incurring interest on the bonds that are outstanding, and you can call them. So it would make more sense to pay down the bonds.
And by paying them down, it allows us potentially to pay the debt off a little earlier than anticipated from what we were looking at.
That's exactly right.
Any questions? Is there a motion to approve?
So move.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Item 4 carries. Thank you, Paul. Item 5, discussion and action on a board resolution identifying the executive director as the CRRMA's Title VI coordinator and authorizing the executive director to take all steps necessary for the continuation of the CRRMA's Title VI program. Mr. Tejas?
Title VI of the Civil Rights Act requires that any recipient of federal funding comply with the non-discrimination provisions of that Title VI, and I've provided 2 handouts for you with a little additional backup related to Title VI and how it works. Prior to your formal identification of the executive director as the Title VI coordinator, the executive director de facto was the coordinator. However, this is a formal step that we're doing to make sure that all the paperwork is in order. By way of example, in the Americas Interchange project, all of the Title VI provisions and requirements were built into the comprehensive development agreement that we signed with the design builder. So we've covered these in the past. This is a little bit more formal. This will also allow me to adopt and post the Title VI policies and assurances and all the related regulations, and of course we'll post those online. I'll share those with you when they're ready. So that's what this item is, and I'm recommending approval.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 6, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute a project development agreement with the Texas Department of Transportation relative to the I-10 corridor aesthetic improvement project. Looks like we're close to some closure on item 6.
That's right. This has been a long time in coming. This, as you all know, this is the aesthetic improvement project along major sections of I-10. By way of background, this project was originally, and still is, has a project budget of $10 million. The problem we ran into, and it's a coordinated effort between the City of El Paso, TxDOT, and the RMA. One of the problems that we ran into early on with this project was the availability of the $10 million. TxDOT had those, but they were in future years. So the RMA initially was going to take out debt on those funds and pay them back once they became available from TxDOT. Of course, that creates interest and closing costs and that sort of thing, and we had related issues with that approach. So in the end, the City of El Paso provided through one of our agreements with them basically an amount up to $500,000 so that we could get started until we actually had a project development agreement in place that gave the RMA access to the $10 million from TxDOT. So that allowed us to begin the conceptual design plan, which we discussed at the last meeting. And in fact, the artist is essentially done with that conceptual design plan. The next step is to move into the design and the construction phase. So what you see before you here is the project development agreement has become in final draft between the RMA and TxDOT. And what this does is it grants the RMA the authority to pursue the project, but more importantly, grants access to the RMA for the full $10 million. So among the first acts, once this is fully executed, and I should mention the approval for this on TxDOT's side has already made it through the Texas Transportation Commission, so TxDOT can sign this at any time once we finalize it, which is a huge step. So once this is executed by myself and also by TxDOT, then one of the first steps will be to reimburse the City of El Paso for approximately $136,000, which we've expended to get us through the conceptual design phase. And of course, the next step that you'll see from me is a work authorization to begin the design and move on to the next step. So that's what this is. And subject to your questions, I would recommend approval.
Questions? Ms. Holguin is serving on the committee that's working with this artist, and I've seen some conceptual designs, and they're pretty spectacular, so I'm excited to see what comes out of this. So with that, is there a motion to approve?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
For the record, I abstain, consistent with my position on this project.
Thank you, Dr. Payan. Item 7, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute and implement change order 001. Yes, our first change order for the design build comprehensive development agreement with the America's Gateway Builders for the I-10 at Loop 375 America's Interchange Project to add the construction of a temporary on-ramp to I-10 westbound. In addition to the motion, I believe Raymond included in your packet a map that basically includes here. And with the construction of the Americas Interchange, there was going to be a closure of the on-ramp scheduled sometime in February. When that ramp was closed, there wouldn't be any access to the freeway once you got off at East Lake until you went to Zaragoza. So it was determined that a on-ramp, temporary on-ramp, was required in order to relieve that congestion. So, Mr. Tejas?
Well, I think the chair has covered it. I would mention, though, in addition to that, the traffic coming from 375 south that will eventually use the new direct connector that we're constructing would actually have to do the same. So we would essentially be adding significant amounts of congestion to Zaragoza and I-10, which is already obviously very congested. With that, I'll ask Mr. Pete Jacobs, the project manager for us on the GEC team for the Americas Interchange project, to bring up the map. If I could ask IT to turn on the Elmo so he can show you exactly what we're looking to do and kind of give us a little more detail.
And just originally a braided ramp, which is a crossover ramp, so you'd have a ramp for each direction, was originally part of the total design for this. But we were not able to afford that braided ramp, and that braided ramp was pulled out of the final construction. So this is what we're putting in to alleviate those concerns. So, Mr. Jacobs, welcome.
Thank you. For the record, Pete Jacobs, GEC for the RMA. What's happened is this off-ramp, or excuse me, this entrance ramp was going to be closed permanently, but the intent is to put in the direct connector from 375 to I-10, southbound to westbound, which will help alleviate the traffic that would normally go through this on-ramp or is going through there today. But because of the timing and the way the construction is going, there's not enough room to leave that ramp, this entrance ramp, and build our new direct connector. If, due to the schedule, we would need to close it now in the next week or two, and that would keep this traffic going through Zaragoza interchange, which already backs up in the morning, or the people would have to find another way to get to this site or get to I-10. So it was determined it would be a lot easier and better for us and the traveling public, well, let's back up, for the traveling public, not necessarily for us, but for the traveling public, to put a different ramp in there, give them the opportunity to stay where they're going today, and then instead of putting them through the Zaragoza interchange. AGB has worked with us, we've negotiated a cost that we feel is very reasonable, and they've made an adjustment to their schedule so that they can get this new ramp in prior to closing this other ramp. The impact of this closing this ramp and opening this new one is we're going to close the exit ramp to Zaragoza, and which is shown here. But what we show in green here is the way that people would now exit to get to Zaragoza. They're not going through any additional signals. They're just going along the frontage road instead of going along the main lanes.
Are we going to use some sort of variable signage, or I guess TxDOT's going to get this change out? Or when are we going to begin communicating this change?
The plan is to have by this Friday everything out to the public notified. We're going to be talking to the newspaper, trying to get them to put something in there. We'll advertise through the newspaper. At the same time, we're talking with the AGB, getting changeable message signs up as soon as today to start notifying folks that this ramp will be closed and that you'll need to use this other ramp. That's the first step, is to let people know which one's going to be closed. So yes, our intent is this week, get everybody notified on this.
I did want to touch on something that Mr. Jacobs mentioned, which is we've reached the cost for this change order at $300,000. We believe that to be reasonable, and I want to thank personally Willie Kramer and Ed Kitzman from the AGB team for working with us and negotiating with us to get there. This change order, though, they've also agreed, as Mr. Jacobs mentioned, which I think is a huge benefit to the traveling public, which is they will not close the existing on-ramp until the new on-ramp is open. So I think that's a huge benefit and really minimizes the disruption to the traveling public. So I want to thank them for working with us, and I think it's a good fix for everyone.
I want to echo Mr. Tejas' comments. I'm very grateful to Ed and Willie and the entire AGB team for kind of taking a project first along with the GEC to make this happen. So thank you for finding a solution that minimized the amount of pain that people using these exits and on-ramps are going to experience. So thank you for that.
Okay, so we're just,
Any questions for Mr. Jacobs? Pete, thank you very much.
you bet, thank you.
Any questions in regards to this particular change order, which is change order 0001? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion is approved. Item 8, discussion and action on board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute the following instruments as they relate to the I-10 at 375 America's Interchange project. A number of these kind of fall in line with each other, and it's in relation to the pass-through toll financing. And I'll let Mr. Tejas kind of cover those items A through D.
Item 8, in essence, deals with the fact that there was a recent legislative fix that decoupled the transportation reinvestment zone requirement that if you are going to use TRZ increment, you also have to have a pass-through component in that project. That legislative requirement is why we built in pass-through toll funds into the Americas project, and we're planning to build them also into the Zaragoza and Trans Mountain Northeast projects. This last legislative session resolved that by removing that requirement. So what you see before you under item 8 in particular is the removal of the pass-through toll component from the Americas and the Zaragoza projects. So with that as the backdrop, item 8A is so to actually implement that, we have to take several individual steps. The first item under A is amending the project development agreement for the Americas Interchange through a fourth amendment to remove that pass-through toll component. The item B is executing a termination of the pass-through toll agreement, which we originally executed between the city, TxDOT, and the RMA in order to bring those funds into the project. So we would terminate that agreement. And under C, we would execute a First Amendment to the original agreement between the RMA and the City of El Paso that originally assigned the TRZ number 2 proceeds to the Americas Interchange project. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what we're doing. I'd ask Mr. Braden to come back up to the podium to cover anything I missed, which I'm certain I probably did miss something.
Well, I think one of the things I'd like Paul to talk about a little bit is just, this component where whenever you utilized TRZ, you had to use pass-through toll financing, which basically we then had to go put debt out for a small amount of $5 million, which is a very expensive, time-consuming process. And so this was huge as TRZs potentially become a component for additional financing sources for projects down the road, because TRZs now have the ability to be utilized not just on property tax values, but I also believe on sales tax values. So this potentially is an instrument that could be utilized to build tomorrow's projects today. So, Paul?
I agree with what Mr. McLaughlin and Raymond just stated. In essence, the law is now simpler. Something has been changed and changed the law, and so we have to go through this somewhat complex process to get us to a simpler structure because we started the Americas project under the old law. And so what happens is the requirement of pass-through toll agreement is no longer required. Pass-through tolls are a great mechanism, but for small amounts like those involved in this project, it would require you to issue a small amount of debt to be paid as cars come through the open project. This way you're getting the money more up front. It's a cheaper cost to the project, and it results into a cheaper cost to the RMA and a cheaper cost to the city because the city is providing the tax increment and the backstop in terms of these SIBs. The city approved everything yesterday. They seem to understand the process, and they agreed with it. I think, this is a little bit complex because the Americas project is ongoing and you're actively involved with it. With respect to Zaragoza and with the Trans Mountain project, we had to cut out the pass-through toll requirement, but those structures are a little simpler because those projects aren't as far along. But the gist of it is to remove the requirement of a pass-through toll agreement.
Any questions? Paul, thank you very much. With
Mr.
that, is
Chair, if I could ask you actually to also add into this the addition item, and I apologize for having to add an addition. When I posted the original agenda, I had forgotten one component. On the addition, you'll see a resolution or a request for just action on a resolution to execute the First Amendment to the agreement with respect to Transportation Reinvestment Zone number 3. So what you see under item 8 deals with Transportation Reinvestment Zone number 2, which covers the Americas and Zaragoza projects. But what I'm also asking for is approval to amend TRZ agreement number 3, which deals specifically with the Trans Mountain Northeast project. So we have to deal with them a little bit.
Let me read that one into the record, and we can handle all of them at the same time. Discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute the First Amendment to the agreement with respect to the Transportation Reinvestment Zone number 3 with the City of El Paso dated June 29, 2010, and any related materials or documentation necessary for the removal of the pass-through toll component from the Loop 375 at FM 659 Zaragoza direct connector project. So basically what we're doing is we're cleaning all of this up based on the kind of legislation. So with that, is there a motion to approve?
And for the record, this motion is not only for item 8 of the regular agenda, but also item 1 for the addition.
Thank you for pointing that out. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Item 9, discussion and action on board resolutions authorizing the executive director to execute the following instruments as they relate to Loop 375 at FM 659 Zaragoza Direct Connector Project. A project development agreement with the Texas Department of Transportation. B, a state infrastructure bank loan, also known as a SIB loan, agreement with the Texas Department of Transportation in the amount not to exceed $20 million. And C, work authorization number 8 with Atkins North America as a CRRMA's general engineering consultant. Mr. Tejas?
I probably should have stopped you because I'm going to ask you to postpone this item to the next meeting. I apologize for that. The items that you see before you, as we discussed under item number 8, we had to take several specific actions related to contracts that dealt specifically with the Americas interchange. The Zaragoza project has not yet progressed to that state. And the next step is to sign the project development agreement and the state infrastructure bank loan for that project. In addition, I would mention the Trans Mountain Northeast will have its own project development agreement and state infrastructure bank loan agreement and its own separate work authorization as well. I believe, and in fact, I'm told by TxDOT that we have what could or should be the final version of the project development agreement. We're to receive that this morning. We also receive, I believe we are in final form for the SIB loan for the Zaragoza project as well. So I believe that we will be back before you on February 8th with final documents for the Zaragoza project, and I'm hopeful also that we can do the same for the Trans Mountain Northeast project. So essentially what item 9 will do in February is it will grant us the opportunity, the access to the funds necessary to do the oversight for the Zaragoza project. It also, through the SIB loan, will grant the RMA the SIB loan proceeds, which we can then turn over to TxDOT so they can complete the project. Similarly, it will do the same thing for us under a separate item for the Trans Mountain Northeast project as well. So, and I'll brief you obviously in more detail in the February agenda, so we can hopefully approve Zaragoza and Trans Mountain documents. So, with that, I would recommend a postponing of item number 9.
Your motion to postpone item 9?
So moved.
Second? All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? The item is postponed. Item 10, we discussed. Item 11, discussion and action on the executive director's report, the fiscal year 2011 annual audit, reappointment of CRRMA board positions 1, 3, and 5, election of officers, February 2012 board meeting, and the proposed 2012 meeting schedule, second Wednesday of each month. Mr. Tejas?
I can go through these very quickly. The item A, the fiscal year annual audit, we're getting close to the end, and I believe that we will have that ready for acceptance by this board at the February 8th meeting as well. We intend to run it through the finance committee as we normally do, and we're looking to see if we can't structure or set up a meeting on the Monday or Tuesday prior to the Wednesday, the 8th meeting. So we're looking to do that, and we'll get with the finance committee members to see if we can make that work. So that's just an update. No action required. Item B, this is an update as well. yesterday at the city council meeting, board positions 1, 3, and 5, which include Mr. Adame, Ms. Holguin, and Mr. Marcus. All three of those members have been reappointed. Their terms last through February 1 of 2014, so that's good news for us. That was approved yesterday. The next item, C, the election of officers. This is a reminder that according to our bylaws, we look to elect officers, which include the vice chair, the secretary, the alternate secretary, and the treasurer. We elect those 4 positions in the February meeting of each year, so that's scheduled for February 8th as well. So that's a reminder, and I'll send out some additional information on that soon. And lastly, item D, I'm recommending, it seems to have worked for us, and it works with the City Council Chamber meetings. I'm proposing that during 2012, we continue to meet on the second Wednesday of each month at 9 a.m. here in Council Chambers.
Does anyone have any issues with the current meeting schedule?
Yeah, it works. It's worked this past year.
Terrific. Is there any other questions or items that we would like to discuss? Any questions from Mr. Tejas? Mr. Tejas, anything else?
Yeah, actually I do. And it was brought to my attention that the addition to the agenda, not only was it late, it had an error in it, unfortunately. So for correction of the record, the item deals specifically with Transportation Reinvestment Zone number 3 and the documentation necessary for the removal of the pass-through toll component from the Loop 375 Northeast project, not the Zaragoza Direct Connector project. So I apologize for that, but for the record, we're correcting that here. So subject to your questions, that's all I have for you today.
Any questions? Thank you for that correction. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? It is 9:58, and we are adjourned. Thank you.
Those opposed.